This video will be just a quick recap of perimeter and area. So perimeter is the distance around the outside of a shape. So a practical example of that would be fencing a paddock. And then the area is the space on the inside of a two-dimensional shape, and that's measured in square units, so millimetre squared, centimetre squared, metre squared. You would use area for when you're figuring out how much grass you might need or how many tiles you might need to put on the floor, that sort of thing. So I'll just do a few examples of perimeter. Perimeter should be a fairly simple concept to start with, and I would start really simple with just a square or a triangle or something that children are familiar with. So for example, we've got a square, and I'll just put those lines on it so you know that each side is the same, and let's say each side is 3 meters long. So we've got a square that's 3 meters by 3 meters. So the perimeter, you could do it as 3 plus 3 plus 3 plus 3, or of course for those of you that are a little bit more advanced, you could do it as 3 times 4 because you know that a square has all the same sides. So this perimeter would be 12 meters. We then could do an example of a rectangle. I'll just quickly fix that up. And in a rectangle, we know that the two longer sides are the same length. So let's say they're 5 meters, and then the two shorter sides are 2 meters. To get our perimeter, we could do 5 plus 5 plus 2 plus 2, or we could do 2 times 5 plus 2 times 2, because there's 2 5-meter sides and 2 2-meter sides. And then that would give us 14 meters altogether, remembering to write our units. And because perimeter is just distance, we just have a meters or centimeters or something after it. The only shape that is a little bit different, and we have to use a formula for it, is circles. So if we're looking at the perimeter of a circle, the perimeter of a circle is actually called the circumference. And we need to make sure when we are looking at the circumference of a circle or the area of a circle that we know two things. One is the diameter. So the diameter is the red line, and that is the whole way across the center of the circle. So distance across center. And then we've got the radius, and I'll do the radius in green so you can see. The radius is halfway across the circle to the center. So radius is halfway. Now, when I teach this in class to year 8s, when they start circles and we're learning about the circumference of a circle, I get them to grab a few different circular things. So we look at like jar lids, hoops, their glue sticks, all of that sort of stuff. And I get them to measure the diameter, and then I get them to measure the distance around the outside of the circle. And we try and work out a bit of a relationship. And when they do it, you notice that it's about 3 times around the outside of the shape is just over 3 times the length of the diameter. And that just over 3 is what we know as pi. And pi is very important in terms of circles, and it is roughly equal to 3.1415. So we generally just use 3.14, but when the kids do these calculations, they actually get to use a calculator, and there is a pi button on the calculator so it is used as accurate as possible. So when we do the circumference, because it's just over 3 times, so that's pi, the circumference formula for a circle is pi times the diameter. Now, we also can use 2 times pi times the radius, because we know that if we double the radius, so multiply the radius by 2, we get the diameter. So, of course, These two things are the exact same. And the only reason we learn both of them is because sometimes we're given the diameter of a circle and sometimes we're given the radius, and we just need to be able to use both. So if I have an example here of a circle that has a radius of 5 centimeters and I need to find the circumference, so the distance around the outside, I would do 2 times pi times 5, and then I would press that into my calculator, and to 1 decimal place I would get 31.4 centimeters. And that's all they have to know for perimeter in terms of circles. So they've got perimeter of basic shapes, which is just adding up the outside, making sure they get every edge, because occasionally you get you might have a paddock that's fenced like this and you know some sides but you don't know the others, and you need to make sure you work out all of the sides before you start adding them up. Then we move to circles, and we know that the circumference is actually the perimeter. So we know that the diameter is the distance across the center from one side of the circle to the other, and the radius is halfway across. And we have established this idea of pi because pi was found through looking at the relationship between the circumference of a circle and its diameter, and it was worked out that it was just over 3 times, which is what pi is. And then I've done an example there for you of finding the circumference of a circle. The next thing we'll move on to is area, and there are a few different shapes that the kids need to know how to do depending on the year level that they're in. So we've got area of rectangles. Now, the area of a rectangle, basically for area, you're just trying to find the space that it covers. So for the area of a rectangle, we do length times width. For the area of a square, you can also use the same, but we know that the square is the same side, so we can actually just do length squared, which is just length times length. So I'll just put that in red here, that we know that it's also length times length. We've got triangles. Now, triangles are important that you use the perpendicular height. So there's 2 formulas. We've got a base and we have the height there. I'll just fix that. So that's base, and then we also have height, and it has to be the perpendicular height. So it's the height of the triangle where it meets at 90 degrees. And we, depending on the ability level and the year level, you will learn it as half the base times the height, or you might learn it as base times height divided by 2. Both things are correct. And the reason we do that is because a triangle is half of a rectangle. So we get that formula from the fact that length times width gives us a rectangle. But if we chop that rectangle in half, then we need to halve the area of that, which is where that half comes in, or the divided by 2. The next shape would also be a parallelogram. And it's important that when you do a parallelogram area, that you use the perpendicular height as well, because it's basically saying if we chop off this triangle here and put it over to there, we've got a rectangle. So you need to make sure you use the perpendicular height, not the slant height. So here the area is base times height, and you use those to work the area out. We also have a trapezium. So a trapezium is a little bit more challenging. We have a couple of more letters. So we've got A and B this time. And it's important to remember that A and B are the parallel sides. So I'm just going to write this here. A and B are parallel. So it's the 2 sides of the trapezium that run parallel to one another. So to do the area of a trapezium, we would do half of A plus B, and it's important that you add those in brackets, times by the height of those things, of the shape. So the height is the perpendicular height again. So I'll just draw that 90 in so you know that it's the perpendicular height. The other way you can do this one, similar to the triangle, is you can do A plus B divided by 2 times the height to get the area of that. And the last one that's super important is a circle. Again, you need to understand about the radius, because for area, you can only use the radius. The diameter is not used at all. So if we've got a radius here, and we label that radius, to do the area, we use pi times the radius squared. You always have to use the radius. Must use radius. You cannot use the diameter. If you're given the diameter, you need to remember that the diameter is the radius multiplied by 2. So we'd need to halve the diameter before you can start. Hopefully those formulas help, and you'll be able to do some perimeter and area questions